ありがとうございます。森谷と申します。そんな拍手をいただくほどではないんですけど、今回はアクセシビリティをテーマにこのミートアップ開催してるんですけど、参加者である CJ さんが参加いただいて、アクセシビリティと直接関係するわけではないんですけど、ダイバーシティっていうところで多様性っていうところの知見がある方ですので、前にミートアップで参加いただいた時に、こういうテーマでお話できませんかって伺ったらいいですよっていう形で快くお引き受けいただいたので、今日は私も全然わからない領域ではあるので楽しみに、伺えればなと思っております。なので皆さんもぜひ何か話題提供ができる方がいらっしゃればぜひ登壇いただいたりご検討いただければと思います。ということで CJ さんよろしくお願いします。
Thank you very much. And thank you for Accessibility Tokyo for having me. And thank you everyone for coming to this talk. So I'm looking forward to spending some quality time with you this evening. I hope you'll get to learn a little bit more about me, and I hope I'll get to learn a little bit more about you tonight. So for those of you who are online, please prepare a piece of paper and a pen. We're going to be writing some things down during this talk. So if you haven't already put the slides and or the script on your phone, they're here. And for people who are wanting the script in Japanese, please scroll all the way down and you'll see the script. And the slides are the same. The first slides are in English, and then the next slides are in Japanese. Great. So let me give you a little picture of kind of who I am. My name is CJ. I'm non-binary, and my pronouns are they, them. So I'm a designer. I'm a game developer. This is me and my partner at Bit Summit, and I'm also an artist. I do glass blowing from time to time, as referenced here by this shirt, for those in the know. So I've been working in UX design and agile software development for the past 10 years, and I have worked at companies such as Apple, Goodpatch, Frog, and as of recently, Yamaneko. I started my own company called Studio Terra Nova with my partner that does design and workshops and video game development. I also started hormone replacement therapy, so you might notice that my voice is much lower than it previously was. That would be out to my friends, not necessarily to the people who are just meeting me for the first time. So most people are pretty curious about why I'm non-binary or how I knew that I was non-binary. So let me share with you the two most happiest moments that I had before coming out. I think it's a pretty common narrative for people to expect me to say, I was so sad before I came out as non-binary, and now everything is great. And many of us know that many of us in the LGBTQ community know that that's not actually true. There are high points before coming out, and there's also low points after coming out. So some of the happiest moments of my life prior to coming out was my wedding with my partner. And when I was 16 years old, I went to an iguana reserve and got covered in lizards. And these are my peak happiest moments, times in my life, things that I look back on and say I was really, really happy then. But during that time, I didn't really think too deeply about my gender. In 2020, the pandemic actually gave me a gift, which was that I got to sit and think about the way I wanted to be seen by other people. And so I started experimenting with my gender presentation. And so this is what I look like now, the me that you see me as. I've definitely changed a lot since coming out, but my smile is still the same. The high points are still very similar, but they're much more frequent. So my day-to-day life gives me a lot more joy than I used to experience, and I feel like I really, I don't regret coming out, and I also don't regret standing here in front of you and talking to you about being non-binary. I still love my partner. Every day we get a little bit closer and we love each other a little bit more. This is a picture of us being really cute, and my friend was like, "Oh, you're so cute. We need to take a picture of you." And I still love that animals climb on me. That was me and my cat just recently. So it actually amazes me that other people would feel like this every day. I didn't understand what happiness was before I came out. It was actually pretty incredible. And it felt like a breath of fresh air. So I wish I could have come out sooner, but my hometown is in the United States and in Texas, which is very conservative. And so I feel safer and happier here in Japan. And we'll get more into that later. So probably as I was giving that talk to you, you were thinking like, oh, that's really interesting. I'm curious to learn more. So tonight I want for us to dive a little bit deeper into that curiosity and ask ourselves, when was the last time that you felt curious about something? So what is curiosity actually? There is a book that I like to reference called Atlas of the Heart that I brought here tonight. And it's a book about understanding and defining emotions. And the way that this book defines emotions is that its curiosity is recognizing a gap in knowledge, in something that interests us, and becoming emotionally and cognitively invested in closing that gap through exploration and learning. And the reason why I bring this up is that in the tech universe, Steve Jobs is a pretty popular guy. And he was once quoted as saying, "Stay hungry and stay foolish, and never let go of your appetite to go after new ideas, new experiences, and new adventures." And I think he was talking about maintaining curiosity throughout your life and looking at something that interests you, that you don't know about, and you want to explore more. But I have noticed that when it comes to talking about gender bias or being non-binary, suddenly we have very little curiosity in this subject. And we're on the defensive. We distance ourselves. And, well, what if I get your pronouns wrong? Like, I don't want you to get mad at me. It's fine. I make mistakes too. Yeah, but I don't know anybody who's non-binary or transgender. Well, now you do. So tonight, I'd like all of us to stay hungry and to stay curious as we're exploring this subject together. So my promise to you tonight is that by the end of the session, you will learn more and expand your knowledge on how to think about gender bias and to learn about design thinking as a way to explore biases with curiosity. So allow me to introduce the 4 phases of design thinking. Is anyone familiar with design thinking or design思考? Show of hands. Okay, good. And well, we'll just slide over these slides. No, I'm just kidding. So design thinking is about creative problem solving, and it's about making something new. It can be for someone else, it can be for your community, it can be for you. The end product is always something that you can test. So when I say test, a lot of times in tech, we say something like a software application or code. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about new ways of thinking. I'm talking about new ways of doing a meeting. I'm talking about new ways of approaching a problem. These are all approaches that can be tested. So think about this in a broader idea than just making software or making an application. So first, we're going to discover. And discovering means understanding whose situation you want to improve. Oops. Is it yours? Is it your team? Is it your community? If the who isn't you, then you have to go out and talk to those people or persons. Try to figure out what they're struggling with. What are some things that they really like? What are some things that they don't like? Defining is deciding on a problem to ideate on. There are many, many problems in this world. There are only a few that we can feasibly test for. So figure out which problem you want to ideate on. Ideation is generating lots and lots of ideas. And then prototyping and testing is picking one of those ideas and then going out into the real world, ideally with the people that you met in discovery and testing it. Now, there are other speakers who have spoken at Accessibility Tokyo that go one step further, and they're actually doing something called co-designing, which is co-collaborating each and every step of this with the population that they're working with. So let's say for people in wheelchairs, there are people who are using wheelchair users who are present in the discover, define, ideation, and prototyping stage. I find this to be the most accessible way of doing design, but sometimes you don't have the luxury of having people around you in that space. So just keep that in mind. This process is a continuous loop. So every time that we prototype and test, we discover something new and we make it better. And this is the basis of how we make things that are useful. It's okay to fail your first time. In fact, it's probably normal or expected. What we like to do is if we've learned something, then we take that learning and we discover it again. We define the problem again, we ideate again, and we prototype again. So rather than a way of building things, I consider this somewhat of a life philosophy, to keep learning and keep trying new things. So now we're going to use this process for something that you might not initially consider design. We're going to try to make the world a little better for someone who is transgender, intersex, or non-binary. So I mentioned that I was non-binary, but this is sort of a quick FAQ for those of you who are not in the know. I'm not going to define all of these, but let's just say that in the LGBTQ community, there are a lot of definitions and a lot of terms, and they can generally be broken down into orientation, i.e. the people that you like to be with, and identity, which is who you are. And so even though the words LGBTQ all are in one, I guess, flat hierarchy, actually there are structures to them, and identity is different than orientation. So we are going to be focusing on the right-hand side rather than the left-hand side. However, the left-hand side can intersect with the right-hand side. There are people who are lesbian and also transgender. There are people who are bisexual and also non-binary. That would be me. People who are gay and intersex. Lots of different combinations, as much combinations as there are people. So let's define the terms on the right-hand side. So transgender is someone whose identity does not match the physical body that they were born with. So they are transitioning from a gender to maybe transitioning to non-binary. Maybe they're transitioning to male to female or female to male. Either way, it assumes some kind of transition. Non-binary people are someone who are neither male or female, or in general just don't want to be categorized in that way. X-gender is also another commonly used term in Japan. Intersex is someone who is born with a mix of male and female biological organs or chromosomes. In fact, speaking of references, this is a mangaka who found out when they were 30 years old that they were intersex. How do you find out so late in life that you're intersex, you might ask? Well, many people who were born with a mix of male or female biological organs or chromosomes get surgery when they're a child to make them appear one gender or another, despite not having those biological organs. So this person was intersex, grew up as female, and then when they were 30 realized that they were intersex and started re-evaluating their life choices. So very cool book. I definitely recommend all of these books will be available for you to read after the presentation. So here in Japan, the gender binary is very strong. There are men and there are women. and they're very different from each other, and it's much more stronger and sort of deeply entrenched than in other countries I've found. So what's it like for a non-binary person like me to live in Japan? Well, let me explain from my personal experience. For context, I don't really feel comfortable with the label she or her, wife, and most recently daughter. It's been sort of a negotiation with my family because there are people who want to call me a female gendered, how do I say, like relative term. But I've had varying levels of discomfort with these labels before they were even, before I came out, but the feeling's gotten even stronger now. So I am biologically female. I dress normally like this, and my voice is slightly deeper. So imagine me right now buying a bus ticket to go to Hakone with my two friends, and they are both biologically and identify as female, also known as cisgender female. And I identify as non-binary. And on the website, I had to choose whether I was male or female. It was required, as is most forms in Japan, either male or female. I had no idea why they needed this information. To be honest, I just didn't really want any trouble. One of the things that is a common thread in people who are trans or non-binary is they don't actually want to make a scene. They just want to live their life. And so did I. This is what the form looked like. You can choose how many people are in your party, and you can choose male or female. And that's it. So when we got on the bus, I realized that without my consent, the bus had automatically assigned us to the women-only priority seats in the front. And I was dressed in a t-shirt and a baseball cap, and I looked like a man. This caused some problems on the bus. It was frustrating and embarrassing for me to be sitting there. The bus driver looked back multiple times and said, "Are you okay? Like, what, why are you here?" And I said, "Well, I mean, I did mark on a form that I was a woman, but it's a biological thing. And I don't want to get in a conversation with you about this. This is a bus driver situation. Like, this is not the level of, comfort that I feel." But the bus was full. So I rode an hour-and-a-half bus ride in a seat that said women only. So how do you feel when you hear me say that? Or how about my friend? My friend recently told me about the time that he had to go get a screening at the gynecologist for uterine cancer, which is pretty normal for people our age. And the staff told him that they thought that he was in the wrong place. And well, of course, that's true because he has a lot of muscles and he works in a warehouse job, but he also has a uterus. And they asked him if he made the booking in error. Maybe he made the booking for his girlfriend. And he said, "Nope, I have a uterus." And he had to say it at the ukitsuke, at the reception, in front of all the other patients. And this is pretty normal for anyone who doesn't neatly fit into a born male looks male and born female looks female category. And if you have trans friends, you can ask them. They probably have stories like this. At first, it doesn't seem like much, but when it happens every week, it starts to get pretty tiring. I think more people in this room can relate to this problem more than me. Maybe some of you aren't transgender or intersex or non-binary, but I bet that each of you has had an experience where someone assumed something about you because of your gender. And I also want to sort of broaden this out to something that someone has assumed about you because of your name, because I think both our gender and our name are very, very tightly tied to our identity, but it doesn't really represent us, right? Just because my name is CJ does not mean that I cannot speak Japanese. Just because I'm non-binary doesn't mean that I am secretly a woman and am pretending to be a man. All of these things I think people can relate to on sort of a general human identity level. So what I'd like you to do is that there are some Post-it notes and paper in the middle of the room, and I would like everybody to take a Post-it note and some paper passed to your friends, or you can use your own like notebook or notepad for writing. But I want you to reflect on this question, which is, can you remember a time that someone assumed something untrue about you because of your gender or your name? And what did it feel like for you? So for those of you who are joining online, please get your pen and piece of paper to take notes on your own. And I will set a timer for 5 minutes. Okay. I have a timer set for 5 minutes, and everyone take some time to reflect on, can you remember a time that someone or something assumed something untrue about you because of your gender? あれあの、あれちょっと日本語とすると、あなたの性別か名前を聞くだけで、誰かが、ごめんなさい。I apologize. I 勝手に switched to Japanese. 誰かが何を、があなたについて、ちょっとなんか間違いとかのことを、決めたことを思い出してみてください。自分にとってどんな感じでしたか？例えば、あなたの名前はこうですので、こう考えたら、例えば、なんだっけ、海外の方の名前は英語しか喋れないとかっていう感じで考えましょう。Okay. So let's continue. Thank you very much for sharing. I'm sure that it was kind of difficult to open up to someone, especially if you didn't know them that well. But I hope that you gained a little bit of empathy. And that's really the purpose of the discovery phase in design, is to think about your own situation and then also share that with other people, and gain some kind of common understanding or common empathy. So I hope that you can empathize with maybe not the specific example that I gave of the Hakone bus or my friend's medical adventures, but I think you can probably empathize with the concept that our names aren't everything, and our gender also isn't everything. It doesn't represent everything about us. So now that you're bought in to this, what's the next problem that we want to solve? So because we have limited time, and normally this kind of workshop takes like an hour and a half, I'm going to help you out a little bit. So let's take the bus example. Is the problem me being non-binary? Should I just stop doing that? Well, some people might say so, but I can't imagine being anything else than what I am. So no. Is the problem the bus's website? Maybe. Is the problem that the clinic my friend went to had never met someone who is a transgender person? Also maybe. But I would say that the problem is that people make assumptions that are wrong about what someone needs or wants based on their perceived gender or identity without asking for clarification first. Someone assumed that checking a button called woman meant that we wanted the woman-only seats, and that there was no need to ask me and my friends if we actually wanted these seats. So one of the things that I thought when I reflected back on this was outside of the embarrassment, I kind of felt bad for anybody who actually wanted those priority seats that didn't get them. Because the three of us, we were all young, able-bodied people. So imagine somebody who's in their 70s who isn't sitting in the priority seat because we took them up because we checked woman, you know? And I thought that was a really unfortunate use of resources based on an assumption. In the case of my friend, I think it's also similar. He looks male, and he is male, but he also has a uterus. And the clinic assumed that anyone who's male doesn't have a uterus and therefore doesn't need uterine cancer screenings. This is also untrue, is that we all need regular cancer screenings. And if you've been putting off any sort of cancer screenings, you should go do that. It's important for our health. And so I think that by them talking to him and questioning him, it puts even more friction on a process that he already probably didn't want to do. Not many people want to go get screened. And so trying to put extra friction in front of that is also an inefficient use of our resources or the way that we want people to experience the system. So, how can we understand when an assumption is being made and how do we respond? Sometimes I like to think of this as like if you came up to a human and you said, "Hey, are you a circle or a triangle?" And the person said, "Well, I have fat, so like maybe a circle sometimes, but I also have angles in my face, so maybe I'm a triangle sometimes." From my perspective, this is what it feels like when somebody asks me what my gender is, because it's not as simple as that, and it also doesn't really matter. That's not the point. The point is that you're talking to another person who is a variety of shapes, and honestly, I think all of us are a variety of shapes, no matter how we identify. So now we're going to get into the fun part. We're going to go into ideation. So, together with you and your partner, I want you to find another group of people, so another 2 other people. So make a group of 4 to 5 people. And together, you're going to write down some ideas from for this scenario. So I'm going to flip the script around and say, imagine that you designed this bus website. You're the designer now, in control. Or maybe you're the developer. So you need to design an accessible way for people to buy bus tickets. You get a task from your team's senior designer, and in her design, you notice that the form has a required question about gender. It asks the user to choose either male or female. You're not transgender or non-binary, but something about the question just feels weird. But the designer shrugs and says, well, it's part of our campaign to make women feel safer. We'll put the women in priority seating so they don't have to sit next to any like strange guys. And also marketing wanted us to give a report on how many women and men signed up. So I want you, these are real problems that do come up in designing websites and designing systems. So I want you to put together some ideas with your team of 4 people of how you could respond to this. Yes. Ooh, you can do whatever you want. So that was a great question. And the purpose of ideating is to go as crazy as you want. So let's say that you have control of this entire situation, right? It could be the person's interaction. It could be the bus. It could be the website. We're talking about the entire system. So think about it in terms of get crazy, be bold, about changing the way that people think about gender in this particular system. And let me put the Japanese slide on. Great. Ah, そうね。日本語に変えます。はい。もし私たちの、なんか見方をちょっと、繰り返してみると、 あなたは、この、さっき、見せたのバスのチケットのウェブサイトのデザイナーになります。で、もしかしてウェブサイトだけじゃなくて、バスの本体とか全部のシステムをリデザインすればどんなアイディアがあるのかっていうの、ことを考えてみてください。アイディエーションの中では、まあ、すごいなんかありえないぐらいのことをどんどん洗い出してみてください。で、2つの制限があります。あなたの、同僚が、なんか男の子と、男性、女性のなんかバイナリのことについて知りたい。知りたいけど、なぜかっていうと、まあ、もしバスの中には怪しい男が、いれば、そういうちょっと、気になる女性は離れてほしいっていうの理由で、あとはマーケティングチームから、まあ、女性か男性の、誰が登録したっていうの情報が得たいので、そういう、ことで欲しいです。で、もし、デザイナーの、考え方を変えるか、それともそういう制限を考えつつ、みんながアクセシブルになるのバスのチケットのウェブサイトをリデザインしてみてください。ちょっと難しいかもしれないけど、頑張ってください。グループは、すいません。グループは4人になります。だから、隣の人と、あとは、もう一つの隣の、チームをちょっと協力してください。4人から5人で考えてみてください。はい。Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Um, so, does anyone feel comfortable sharing an idea that they had?
Yeah, thank you. This is Ashok. So it sounded like very simple problem. Then we like dive deeper into it. Then a lot of consideration and yeah. So finally we decided that first one we need to have if there is an option to have different buses with the different like layout of seats.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be possible. It depends on the size of the company. So that could be one option. And the next option is we don't really need a gender for the bus, but we may need to ask them a question of, do you need a uh, women priority seats or women only seats? And also we need to have a special request or special seats, you could say, where like elderly people or not able people can access that one. So these are the main points. And what else did we?
We also we also make a kind of like a place there where like the people can put notes on, and then they can write like any special needs they need. I guess
Great.
that's yeah.
Thank you. Round of applause, everyone. Yay. All right. Is there any one other team? もしちょっとなんかアイディアを共有したい方がいらっしゃいましたら、日本語でも英語でも。
So a lot of the ideas I think they have already spoken, which okay, which they had already said, but what we decided was more on the layout basis, considering that it's not always possible to keep separate buses, because obviously it depends on the company's economic resource that they have. So coming from India, a lot of the government buses have a particular layout, which I think could be implemented in Japan itself.
Interesting.
So in India, they have a separate layout for women, which is kept in the front of the bus. There is a separate layout for the seniority people or with people with disabilities. And then there's a section which is only for general. men, women, everybody sits. And there's this very culture sort of thing that's implemented where based on the person entering, people naturally give up their seats. This is one. And I think this could be implemented in Japan itself, where you have designated layouts which can be decided based on the ticket, where you say you're male, female, do you require the priority seat, do you not? And probably a possible reason so that it filters out who needs it in a higher priority than the other. And obviously the other thing is we decided, obviously there could still be people who might be completely uncomfortable with this. So maybe having a separate bus at a particular time for a particular case group. That could also be decided based on user data, which could further implement, should it be at this time, should it be at that time, which could highlight it better.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. So I want you to think about the ideas that have been shared here, and realize that I know that some of us are US people and some of us are thinking about the election. Maybe just me. But that I've heard a lot of people say things like transgender people want special accommodations or non-binary people want special accommodations. Based on all of these ideas, I don't think that's true. I think that what we're trying to express is that everybody, the solutions that we're talking about here benefit everybody, no matter what gender they are. And what we're asking for is simply a little bit of consideration in the way that we build systems. So, going into something to keep in mind, if you're in a real situation like this, and this was just a scenario, but let's say that you're in a real situation, if you give feedback, it's important to ask questions like saying, why did you do or say that? Or can you help me understand why this matters? And take some time to listen, and then offer to help with the change if you're willing, and elevate others' voices. So especially in Japan, the senpai-kohai relationship is very strong. And so if you have somebody who's a junior who is raising their voice and you agree with them, then back them up. Give them some space to propose something to senior leadership. And in the case that you get feedback about maybe a bias that you have, you can pause, breathe in. One of the things I always like to say is that curiosity is never born from stress. We can never be curious when we're stressed. So calm down first. And second is getting curious. And then asking yourself compassionately, why is it that you made that assumption? Is there something that you thought about in the past, or maybe an assumption that someone made of you, and then you thought, well, everyone's like this. And if it's appropriate to the situation, then apologize to the person. And the most important part is that you make sure your actions communicate your intent. So not just apologizing, but changing the way that you're behaving or thinking about your actions. So, what are you going to do after you get out of this workshop? These are some great ideas, but how do we actually apply them? So this is where I would like you to do a little homework. So we had a sample scenario about a bus not related to your real job. Now we're going to get real. So in the same group, I want you to discuss together some of the ideas that you've written down. And are there parts of your professional work or personal life that could be made better by asking questions about what everyone's assuming? Are there some things, maybe you don't run a bus website, but considering people's requests kind of as constraints or things to kind of talk about and negotiate, rather than saying okay, those are constraints, we can't touch them. if you can't think of anything, maybe some possible actions might be when a coworker makes a generalized statement about gender, like, well, of course, women naturally like pink things. And you can ask them, why is it that they think that? Or asking why simple sign-up forms, if it's not necessary, are tracking whether a person is male or female. What's the data that people want to get? And also, always including non-binary and trans people as your user group that you test or co-design with, especially if your application is meant to be used by a large, broad group of people. At least have one person in the group that identifies neither as male or female or is of a different gender variant can really help bring the things that you're doing to life and ask some really difficult questions. So let's take 5 minutes in the same group and go over how can you apply this to real life. 日本語でしましょうか。はい。次には何を持ち帰ればいいでしょうかっていうのを質問と考えば、プロトタイプ何がテストできるのかっていうのことを次のグループに皆さんと一緒に話したいと思います。自分の仕事と、生活の中では誰もが思い込んでいることについて質問をすることでより良くなる部分がありますか。例えば思い込むっていうのは性別に関するの、思い込みがある方に対する質問を指すとか、こういうシナリオを考えつつ自分の生活か、仕事をどうやって良くなるのかっていうのことをちょっと実際に皆さんと一緒に考えましょう。Thank you everyone for sharing your ideas and your thoughts and also your prototypes. I hope that you can take this as a homework to do something and try it in the next couple of weeks. And I really appreciate that everybody stayed hungry with me and stayed curious. Maybe some of you are actually hungry right now. And stayed foolish. And remember never to let go of your appetite to go after new ideas and new experiences and new adventures. Also, I hope that everyone continues to be hungry. I also hope that everyone continues to make mistakes because this process isn't about being perfect. It's not about getting the right thing the first time. That would be waterfall and not agile. That was a joke for you software developers. Yeah, but that being said, just get better bit by bit. That's all I ask of you. So thank you for attending this workshop. You can email me at cj@studioterranova.net or my website, Emma Blue Sky, is there. And if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them now in English or in Japanese. Oh.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. はい、それでは、質問、コメントがあれば受けたいと思いますので、じゃあ、マイクを持ってきますね。
Oh, yeah, true.
Japanese or English?
Thank you for the wonderful. はい。変えるんですね。はい。Thank you so much. One thing that I wanted to ask is I'm genuinely curious about what you would propose for the bus question, because I was thinking, generally I don't think gender is a necessary thing to ask, but I do understand, as a cis woman, if I'm going to use the bus, I would rather be seated someone who is not a man. So I do understand that kind of safety concerns.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, what ideas that you would you have in mind, especially when it comes to the bus seating, like realistically, it's not something that you could do in like 1 or 2 days, but I think like changing the website, like how the booking process works is probably like easier to approach. So I wanted to hear like what ideas you have in mind.
Yeah, no, great. So first, I generally have a rule that if it is not medically necessary, I don't ask people for their gender. Because there's a certain medical necessity to knowing what organs someone has, but when it comes to riding the bus, I think that question is not useful. But I believe it was your team that talked about asking people if they wanted priority seating, or asking if they wanted to have, because in Japan, there are josei senyo, like, you know, buses and, not buses, train cars, right? And so like having a area for that and saying, do you want the josei senyo area? Okay, right? I do think that there is something to be like negotiated, but I have to say, like my first, how do I say, I always have this inner critic in my head where being like, well, what if somebody who like is a real weird person like says, I want to be part of the josei senyo area? But I have to remind myself that that is literally a very small percentage of the population. The large majority of the population is going to respect the overall preferences of other people. And I would put that under a meiwaku customer, like somebody who is trying to cause trouble, and basically say, if you cause trouble in the josei senyo area, we'll drop you off on the side of the road. You don't need to have a bus ride. So I think that just putting that kind of thing in place and saying like, remember, behave yourself in the josei senyo area will do a lot for people who may or may not want to try to game the system.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely think that like there's too much emphasis put on like, oh, what if this like malicious person shows up, which is like, no, and also like it often tends to end up being like scapegoating on like trans women especially.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I do kind of do this something similar in my professional job as well. So it's really nice to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, is it audible? I hope so. So yeah, so my question is like, so there are two majority of people, one who accept we do have different gender people and one who doesn't. And there are great people in both sides. There's scientists and philosophers and everyone, I mean, throughout the history. The most not important, like logical question, people from the side where it's only men and women, they say, we have only X's and XY. So how do you like take on that kind of thing? I mean, it's their belief, but they go on to influence other people and they take a strong stand. And yeah, so how do you take up, and how should people take up this kind of situations?
It's funny you ask that question because I actually had a slide dedicated to that answering that question, and then I thought, oh well, we'll just cut it. But essentially this, that chromosomally, there are a majority of XX and XY people. However, there are also triple X people, XXXY people, and a variety of other like chromosomal differences that are across multiple people. So I mean, I don't want to be glib here, but my reaction to that is biology is whack. I mean, if you talk to a biologist, they'll say there are always trends across like data sets, right? There's always patterns, but there's always going to be something that is 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 always going to be there's always going to be something that's outside of that distribution. And so I would probably say to people who say that there is an argument to say like sex and gender are different, I would get into that, but basically sex is biological, gender is about presentation and identity. And so if somebody's trying to argue with me that I'm trying to argue that there is more biological diversity than there actually is, I would say, no, it's about gender. It's about like presentation. However, if somebody really wants to get into it with me and say that like biology isn't actually diverse, I question that. And I question that because there are a lot more, I think anybody who's a scientist would tell you that even in the amount of research that they've done from PhD and onwards, there are a variety of things that they don't know or understand.
Thank you so much for answering.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. I think that's all the time we have for questions today, but we also have the mingling time, networking time after this. So if you have more questions, please approach CJ. Please continue to talk to each other. And on Zoom, we have the same, but on Zoom for those of you who want to continue discussing on Zoom. And
はい。では、本編は以上とさせていただきます。CJ さん、今日は本当にありがとうございました。